Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, where today we have one hell of a review for you as I sit down and talk about Olivia Wilde's latest film, Don't Worry, Darling. Directed by Olivia Wilde and starring Florence Pugh, Harry Styles, Chris Pine, and Wilde herself. Of course, you knew all that because this movie has become quite popular. Now, at the outset, I'd want to be clear that I am not here to review the behind-the-camera scenes drama of what is happening with this movie in real time. I think it's a little unfortunate because this movie frankly didn't deserve to have all this just craziness engulf it from every single angle. And to be honest, I think for all the people who worked on this movie who aren't the name talent at the front of the poster, I owe them the respect, but also that name talent to talk about the movie as it is. I'm not here to do celebrity gossip because honestly, there's enough in this movie that we will more than happily fill this time in my review. This film is fascinatingly paradoxical. It is so damn intriguing in that Wilde is able to access a hypnotic hold over her viewer. She's able to build the stakes as the film goes along, thanks in part to a really dynamite performance from Florence Pugh. She is enthrallingly sympathetic and grounds the film with a strong emotional center that is necessary for the film to work. I will say that I was questioning the cinematic construct of the movie. I was wondering whether it was actually supporting these ideas, but I do think that Wilde does have something to say, and it makes the journey worthwhile. She approaches the male ego with a female gaze that I found refreshing. I think so often we see, if we're going to see kind of the destruction of male characters, we see them through an anti-hero lens. The Breaking Bads, The Sopranos. When men start to fall apart in traditional stories, there's always still an element of sexiness. There's always an element of just you're captivated by the power that they have or the power that they're losing, but you're always just so committed to them, both as an audience member, but also the creative team is committed to them. And here, I think because Wilde represents a different perspective on this, she approaches a lot of these male characters with an appropriate amount of embarrassment. These characters are so pathetic, and you see the frailty of the masculine image, and in part why that frailty leads to the destruction of the female image, because the men can't look inward. They only have to then throw that energy out and have this mentality of, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. Wilde definitely has something interesting to say here about the male ego and its destructive tendencies. And I only had wished that the script also understood her thematic center, because it would have made, I think, Don't Worry, Darling a much more successful endeavor as a whole. The art direction here, both the costume design, the production design, is mesmeric and lush. It creates this simultaneous tranquility and dread that I found really appealing. The score and sound design, I saw it in IMAX and I was really glad I did, because the sound design in particular penetrates the viewer. The use of music, the soundtrack is almost pervasive. But it serves a point because it's trying to hypnotize the viewer. It's trying to hypnotize your auditorial senses and just have you fall in love with this time period in a way that is so aggressive that you just have to surrender to the soundtrack. And I appreciated Wilde's bravado. She is a director who took a major chance with this movie. You look at something like Booksmart and then the jump she makes to this, you really see that she wants to sink her teeth into something. She wants to innovate. And I think we don't see that often enough from directors. And it's definitely from female directors. I don't think they're given the opportunity to do so, which is another completely separate problem. There's a scope to this movie I really appreciated. I think she makes great use of her setting. And I think she pulls out performances from her actors that are really interesting the more you think about it. So let's talk about Harry Styles. There definitely seems to be a disconnect with his performance and the rest of the ensemble. I think partly due to his lack of knowledge with the craft and just not having as much experience as his fellow actors. He comes off in a similar way, not as drastic, and I don't think he torpedoes the movie in the same way. But it did remind me a little bit of Ben Platt in the Dear Evan Hansen film adaptation, where you so clearly see him acting. I always saw Harry Styles, and I definitely think that gets in the way of the film at many of its key turning points. I think somebody like Robert Pattinson could have delivered the same thing, but disappearing into the role in ways that would have benefited the film. Because this is what I find so interesting about Styles' role linked to what I perceive Wilde is doing by attacking the male ego. This is a role that at the start of the film has to be somebody you fall in love with, that you get whisked away along with Florence Pugh, that is this sexy, protective individual, playing a Prince Charming figure in many ways. But then as the film continues to go along, where you see almost the impotency of his spirit as a character just come more and more into the spotlight, it's a very difficult role for any actor, which is why I think it's unfortunate that somebody that just hasn't had the same dexterity in terms of their acting roles was given this sort of role. I'm not even sure that Shia LaBeouf could have pulled it off. I think he would have been too commanding in the role and you wouldn't have fell in love with him. I think that in a weird way, Styles benefits the movie, even if I don't think his choices as an actor are altogether intentional. There are just certain beats that are able to impact on a greater scale because Harry Styles, the persona off camera, is playing this role. It reminds me a little bit of the casting of Leonardo DiCaprio in The Wolf of Wall Street. That casting is made because Martin Scorsese is aware of the terribleness of Jordan Belfort, and he wants to sympathize with the audience. He wants you to like Jordan Belfort because he knows that if you don't, you're just not going to be on the same wavelength as the film. Harry Styles' casting, I think when it comes to what Wilde wanted to do, is very unconventional, but in a way does work for the movie. As far as his performance, I can't say the same, but this weird disconnect between the two, between the directorial pursuit and the actor's actual performance, somehow it ends up working. Again, it doesn't completely work because I was aware of it completely. It didn't become a part of the text in a way that just felt natural. I mean, there's even a scene where Chris Pine is like making Harry Styles like dance almost like a monkey, and you're just like, is the movie aware of what it's making Harry Styles do? Is Harry Styles aware of what the movie's asking him to do? The movie is almost parading him as a puppet. And once that scene happens, you kind of can't look at his performance the same way. Now it makes it think that all of the questionable choices he was making, that Wilde knew they were deliberate, but Styles didn't. Again, it's like this whole thing is like just a mind meld of creative intentions. Because I can't really commend Harry Styles. I can't really compliment his performance, but at the same time, it weirdly supports the overall thesis of the movie. I think the biggest problem with Don't Worry, Darling is the clarity of its intentions. In screenwriting, you always want to have full awareness of the central question of your script, which constitutes the main character and their external goal. A great example of this is in Finding Nemo. The central question is, will Marlin find Nemo? The want versus need has an imbalance here. You know what she needs, but you're not necessarily sure what she wants at all times. It basically leaves Olivia Wilde to create tension out of thin air because the script isn't really establishing a fluid progression of events. And she does this in somewhat successful ways. Again, I felt the intensity growing and building, but I do think they were achieved through some very contrived ways. This idea that Florence Pugh is getting visions of something and that's making her question. I call it the Harry Potter dream sequence because anytime they needed Harry to like start to question or build up the energy for the third act, he just gets a vision of what Voldemort is doing and then, all right, we got to go deal with it. It's very much that in this movie, and the movie didn't have to be that. There was enough here that I think if they, again, really got down and solidified that central question for Florence Pugh's Alice, then I think the whole movie would have come into focus in a much better way. Because as is, the film just feels very derivative. It feels like a Jordan Peele film. It feels like Todd Haynes' Safe, WandaVision. And the distinction between those works and Don't Worry, Darling is a third act that properly breathes, therefore affecting the viewer and motivating the characters. The third act is rushed through, almost as if COVID was shutting the movie down and they only had like 2 days to wrap up all of the plot threads. There's a randomness to the third act that makes some of the film unsatisfying because the first 2 acts are so predicated on the answers in the third, and then the answers in the third get rushed through. The third act just devolves into this chase scene, which Wilde, to her credit, directs with a thrilling verve. The script needed to be prouder of itself at the climax, but instead assumes the worst of its intentions and buckles under the pressure. Ultimately, it's a film I feel bad for. I feel like it's a misunderstood movie. But because of some lapses in the script, a rushed third act, and the unfortunate controversy surrounding it, I fear many will not worry about the creative ambitions prevalent here, instead being deafened by all the erratic outside noise. So, that's my review for Don't Worry Darling. I kind of want to recommend it. It's a really just peculiar movie. You're not going to see another movie like this. And it's almost one of the clearest examples in recent memory of a Rorschach test of a film. I think every film inevitably becomes a Rorschach test because it's a specific image that you're going to receive in a personal way. There's a je ne sais quoi about this movie that even in its failings, I found it somewhat irresistible. So let me know in the comments what you thought of my review, and if you saw the movie, what you thought. Please do mark spoilers, though, if you're going to talk about the film, because this movie does have a lot of twists and turns, and we want to respect other people watching the film. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to not miss any new videos from Spoilers Ahead with Anthony Post. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you at the movies.